Part 5. It was dawn, the dawn of Ilsa's wedding day. Ilsa was sleeping when Emily slipped out of bed and went to the window. Dawn. A cluster of dark pines in a trance of calm down by the Blairwater. The air tremulous with elfin music. The wind winnowing the dunes. Dancing amber waves on the harbor. The eastern sky abloom. The lighthouse at the harbor pearl white against the ethereal sky. Beyond all, the blue field of the sea with its foam blossoms. And behind, that golden haze that swathed the hill of the tansy patch. Teddy, wakeful, waiting, welcoming the day that gave him his heart's desire. Emily's soul was washed empty of every wish or hope or desire, except that the day were over. It is, she thought, comforting when a thing becomes irrevocable. Emily, Emily. Emily turned from the window. It's a lovely day, Ilsa. The sun will shine on you. Ilsa, what is the matter? Ilsa, you're crying. I can't help it, sniffed Ilsa. It seems to be the proper, inescapable caper after all. I beg Milly's pardon. But I'm so beastly afraid. It's an infernal sensation. Do you think it would do any good if I threw myself on the floor and screamed? What are you afraid of? Said Emily, a little impatiently. Oh, Ilsa sprang defiantly out of bed. Afraid I'll stick my tongue out at the minister. What else? Part 6. What a morning. It always seemed a sort of nightmare recollection to Emily. Guests of the clan came early. Emily welcomed them until she felt that the smile must be frozen on her face. There were endless wedding gifts to unwrap and arrange. Ilsa, before she dressed, came to look them over indifferently. Who sent in that afternoon tea set? She asked. Perry, said Emily. She had helped him choose it. A dainty service in a quaint old-fashioned rose design. A card with Perry's black forcible handwriting. To Ilsa with the best wishes of her old friend Perry. Ilsa deliberately picked up piece after piece and dashed it in fragments on the floor before the transfixed Emily could stop her. Ilsa, have you gone crazy? There, what a glorious smash! Sweep up the fragments, Emily. That was just as good as screaming on the floor. Better. I can go through with it now. Emily disposed of the fragments just in time. Mrs. Clorinda Mitchell came billowing in pale blue muslin and cherry-hued scarf. A sonsy, smiling, good-hearted cousin by marriage. Interested in everything. Who gave this? Who had sent that? She'll be such a sweet bride, I'm sure, gushed Mrs. Clorinda. And Teddy Kent is such a splendid fellow. It's really an ideal marriage, isn't it? One of those you read about. I love weddings like this. I thank my stars I didn't lose my interest in youthful things when I lost my youth. I've lots of sentiment in me yet, and I'm not afraid to show it. And did Ilsa's wedding stockings really cost $14? Aunt Isabella Hislop, née Mitchell, was gloomy. Offended because her costly present of cut sherbet glasses had been placed beside Cousin Annabel's funny set of old-fashioned crocheted doilies. inclined to take a dark view of things. "I hope everything will go off well, but I've got an uneasy feeling that trouble is coming. A presentiment, so to speak. Do you believe in signs? A big black cat ran right across the road in front of us down in the hollow. And right on that tree as we turned in at the lane was a fragment of an old election poster. Blue ruin. In black letters 3 inches long, staring us in the face. That might mean bad luck for you, but hardly for Ilsa." Aunt Isabella shook her head. She would not be comforted. "They say the wedding dress is like nothing ever seen on Prince Edward Island. Do you think such extravagance proper, Miss Starr?" "The expensive part of it was a present from Ilsa's old great-aunts in Scotland, Mrs. Mitchell, and most of us are married only once." Whereupon Emily remembered that Aunt Isabella had been married 3 times, and wondered if there wasn't something in black cat magic. Aunt Isabella swept coldly off, and later on was heard to say that Starr girl is really intolerable since she got a book published. Thinks herself at liberty to insult anyone." Emily, before she had time to thank the fates for her freedom, fell into the clutches of more Mitchell relatives. This aunt did not approve of another aunt's gift of a pair of ornate Bohemian glass vases. "Bessie Jane never had much sense. A foolish choice. The children will be sure to unhook the prisms and lose them." "What children?" "Why, the children they will have, of course." "Miss Starr will put that in a book, Matilda," warned her husband, chuckling. Then he chuckled again and whispered to Emily, "Why aren't you the bride today? How come Ilsa to cut you out, hey?" Emily was thankful when she was summoned upstairs to help Ilsa dress. Though even here, aunts and cousins kept bobbing in and out, saying distracting things. "Emily, do you remember the day of our first summer together, when we fought over the honor of playing bride in one of our dramatic stunts? Well, I feel as if I were just playing bride. This isn't real." Emily felt, too, as if it were not real. But soon now, it would be all over, and she could be blessedly alone. And Ilsa, when dressed, was such an exquisite bride that she justified all the fuss of the wedding. How Teddy must love her. "Doesn't she look just like a queen?" whispered Aunt Laura adoringly. Emily, having slipped into her own harebell blue, kissed the flushed maiden face under the rose-point cap and pearls of its bridal veil. "Ilsa, dear, don't think me hopelessly Victorian if I say I hope you'll be happy ever after." Ilsa squeezed her hand, but laughed a little too loudly. "I hope it isn't Queen Victoria Aunt Laura thinks I resemble," she whispered. "And I have the most horrible suspicion that Aunt Janie Milburn is praying for me. Her face betrayed her when she came in to kiss me. It always makes me furious to suspect that people are praying for me. Now, Emily, do me one last favor. Herd everybody out of this room. Everybody. I want to be alone, absolutely alone, for a few minutes." Somehow, Emily managed it. The aunts and cousins fluttered downstairs. Dr. Burnley was waiting impatiently in the hall. "Won't you soon be ready? Teddy and Halsey are waiting for the signal to go into the drawing-room." "Ilsa wants a few minutes alone." "Oh, Aunt Ida, I'm so glad you got here," to a stout lady who was coming pantingly up the stairs. We were afraid something had happened to prevent you." "Something did," gasped Aunt Ida, who was really a second cousin. In spite of her breathlessness, Aunt Ida was happy. She always liked to be the first to tell a piece of news, especially unpleasant news. "And the doctor couldn't come at all. I had to get a taxi. That poor Perry Miller, you know him, don't you? Such a clever young chap, was killed in a motor collision about an hour ago." Emily stifled a shriek, with a frantic glance at Ilsa's door. It was slightly ajar. Dr. Burnley was saying, "Perry Miller killed. Good God, how horrible!" "Well, as good as killed. He must be dead by this time. He was unconscious when they dragged him out of the wreck. They took him to the Charlottetown hospital and phoned for Bill, who dashed right off, of course. It's a mercy Ilsa isn't marrying a doctor. Have I time to take off my things before the ceremony?" Emily, crushing her anguish over Perry, showed Aunt Ida to the spare room and returned to Dr. Burnley. "Don't let Ilsa know about this," he cautioned needlessly. "It would spoil her wedding. She and Perry were old cronies. And hadn't you better hurry her up a little? It's past the time." Emily, with more of a nightmare feeling than ever, went down the hall and knocked on Ilsa's door. There was no answer. She opened the door. On the floor, in a forlorn heap, lay the bridal veil and the priceless bouquet of orchids, which must have cost Teddy more than any Murray or Burnley bride had ever paid before for her whole trousseau. But Ilsa was nowhere to be seen. A window was open, the one over the kitchen stoop. "What's the matter?" exclaimed Dr. Burnley impatiently, coming up behind Emily. "Where's Ilsa?" "She's gone," said Emily stupidly. "Gone? Gone where?" "To Perry Miller." Emily knew it quite well. Ilsa had heard Aunt Ida and— "Damn!" said Dr. Burnley. Part 8. In a few moments the house was a scene of consternation and flabbergasted wedding guests, all exclaiming and asking questions. Dr. Burnley lost his head and turned himself loose, running through his whole repertoire of profanity, regardless of womenfolks. Even Aunt Elizabeth was paralyzed. There was no precedent to go by. Juliet Murray, to be sure, had eloped, but she had got married. No clan bride had ever done anything like this. Emily alone retained some power of rational thought and action. It was she who found out from young Rob Mitchell how Ilsa had gone. He had been parking his car in the barnyard when— "I saw her spring out of that window with her train wrapped around her shoulders. She slid down the roof and jumped to the ground like a cat, tore out to the lane, jumped in Ken Mitchell's runabout, and was off like the devil was after her. I thought she must have gone crazy." "She has, in a way. Rob, you must go after her. Wait, I'll get Dr. Burnley to go with you. I must stay here to see to things. Oh, be quick as you can. It's only 14 miles to Charlottetown. You can go and come in an hour. You must bring her back. I'll tell the guests to wait." "You'll not make much out of this mess, Emily," prophesied Rob. Part 9. Even an hour like that passed. But Dr. Burnley and Rob returned alone. Ilsa would not come. That was all there was to it. Perry Miller was not killed, was not even seriously injured. But Ilsa would not come. She told her father that she was going to marry Perry Miller and nobody else. The doctor was the center of a little group of dismayed and tearful women in the upper hall. Aunt Elizabeth, Aunt Laura, Aunt Ruth, Emily. "I suppose if her mother had lived, this wouldn't have happened," said the doctor dazedly. "I never dreamed she cared for Miller. I wish somebody had wrung Ida Mitchell's neck in time. Oh, cry, cry, yes, cry," fiercely to poor Aunt Laura. "What good will yelping do? What a devil of a mess! Somebody's got to tell Kent. I suppose I must. And those distracted fools down there have to be fed. That's what half of them came for, anyway. Emily, you seem to be the only creature left in the world with a grain of sense. See to things, there's a good girl." Emily was not of an hysterical temperament, but for the second time in her life, she was feeling that the only thing she could do would be to scream as loud and long as possible. Things had got to the point where only screaming would clear the air. But she got the guests marshaled to the tables. Excitement calmed down somewhat when they found they were not to be cheated out of everything. But the wedding feast was hardly a success. Even those who were hungry had an uneasy feeling that it wasn't the thing to eat heartily under such circumstances. Nobody enjoyed it, except old Uncle Tom Mitchell, who frankly went to weddings for the spread, and didn't care whether there was a ceremony or not. Brides might come and brides might go, but a square meal was a feed. So he ate steadily away, only pausing now and then to shake his head solemnly and ask, "What air the women coming to?" Cousin Isabella was set up on presentiments for life, but nobody listened to her. Most of the guests were afraid to speak, for fear of saying the wrong thing. Uncle Oliver reflected that he had seen many funeral repasts that were more cheerful. The waitresses were hurried and flurried and made ludicrous mistakes. Mrs. Derwent, the young and pretty wife of the new minister, looked to be on the point of tears, nay, actually had tears in her eyes. Perhaps she had been building on the prospective wedding fee. Perhaps its loss meant no new hat for her. Emily, glancing at her as she passed the jelly, wanted to laugh, a desire as hysterical as her wish to scream. But no desire at all showed itself on her cold white face. Shrewsbury people said she was as disdainful and indifferent as always. Could anything really make that girl feel? And under it all, she was keenly conscious of only one question. Where was Teddy? What was he feeling, thinking, doing? She hated Ilsa for hurting him, shaming him. She did not see how anything could go on after this. It was one of those events which must stop time. Part 10. "What a day!" sobbed Aunt Laura as they walked home in the dusk. "What a disgrace! What a scandal!" "Alan Burnley has only himself to blame," said Aunt Elizabeth. "He has let Ilsa do absolutely as she pleases all her life. She was never taught any self-control. All her life she had done exactly as she wanted to do whenever the whim took her. No sense of responsibility whatever." "But if she loved Perry Miller," pleaded Laura. "Why did she promise to marry Teddy Kent then, and treat him like this? No, you need make no excuses for Ilsa. Fancy a Burnley going to Stovepipe Town for a husband." Someone will have to see about sending the presents back, moaned Laura. I locked the door of the room where they were. One never knows, at such a time. Emily found herself alone in her room at last. Too dazed, stricken, exhausted, to feel much of anything. A huge round striped ball unrolled itself on her bed and opened wide pink jaws. Daff, said Emily wearily, you're the only thing in the world that stays put. She had a nasty, sleepless night, with a brief dawn slumber, from which she wakened to a new world where everything had to be readjusted. And she felt too tired to care for readjustment.